When I work with my clients, more often than not, like, I don't expect them to speak music keys. They're not going to be like, oh, I want like a G minor 7 over that and this type of, like, that's just, silly. Like, that's my job to kind of translate that language. So what we often do is just have a whole series of playlists. So it happened to be that Jason and I liked a lot of the same content. So it was a lot of us being like, ooh, what if we had, some guitar work? Like, some of the stuff from Last of Us was a huge, huge influence. It's a very beautiful Americana score. Even down to, there's a beautiful video game series called The Plague Tale, gorgeously orchestrated, about this tragic French story. And we didn't really use anything that's like that highbrow from it, but the certain ways that they structured their pieces and structured their horror and structured this sense of dread was like, oh, that's a really cool thing. So it's fun to take something from like the classical world or someone who does a lot more classical composition and be like, let's use some of those techniques with our weird banjo synth guitar palette and see what happens. So it's kind of funny to me where it's like, I probably took a little bit more influence from a lot of video game scores, but I've also been a horror geek my entire life. It's just something that's kind of ingrained, in us as people. It's impossible to say what is it, like It Follows is always going to be just a wonderful influence, the wave of Stranger Things and letting us do synths. And then like probably the other two films that we really talked about a lot was the Johan Johannessen's score for Mandy was a huge influence, which is a really cool, odd, like Nicolas Cage film, and even weird for Nicolas Cage standards. And then Annihilation, which had this very weird alien-y, like, we wanted to kind of find some ways to have some motifs and some sounds that just felt like weird and surreal, and they kind of stuck out that way. So some of the nonsense we did was on this very budget banjo with our very budget bow. And what was kind of fun about it is just that, like, it just creates gnarly overtones. It's super hard to play. I'm not good at bowing. So those combinations created some... So it often took us having to play in some kind of unique tunings to get different overtones and stuff like that. But really fun and effective when, there's a little spook in the woods or something like that. And so one of the techniques we used a lot of was not only using this baritone guitar from Revolta, which is actually tuned down about a fourth, which makes it a little bit deeper, darker, kind of opens up some other tones you're not used to hearing from a guitar, is using this thing called an E-bow, which is essentially like electronic bow. It does something with magnets. I don't really know how they work, but here, you can check out the sound. They can be a little tricky to control, but it's a weird tremolo, a bunch of reverb. You can create some really cool textures that are, rooted in the sound of an electric guitar. Jason and I had a few different emotions that we really wanted to kind of tackle with this film, and that was, as we were scoring the final cut to even when we were starting on the demos. Like we talked about those different strands, where I really wanted to have this intimate, sweet, yet bittersweet vibe for Tyler and Jen's relationship, where you'd really feel for them as a couple, like their sweet moments laying in bed felt lovely and like as it should. There's a warmth to it. Just so that then when we go back to real time, when we're stuck in a parking lot and we're homeless, the sense of dread and the isolation and the lurking doom, the debt creeping up on you, these kids, are you getting harassed by a bunch of shitty teenagers? Are you getting harassed by something more nefarious? Even as Jen, falls into part of her psychosis and all this stuff, like, so there's a constant like sense of like surrealism and lurking and doom. So when we want to be sweet, we try to be really sweet and really tragic, but obviously without being like overly wrought or overly, cheesy or anything like that. But we really wanted to have this approachable emotional palette, just so that when things do get heavy and things do get hard and things do get kind of spooky, it kind of hits you in the gut a little bit more. So it's kind of a fun game of contrast that way. So one of the simpler but more effective sounds we use throughout the film with some of our wubbing, creepy bass stuff, I got from our Moog grandmother, and it just took a little bit of, just simple patching. I just have 2 square waves, it's feeding back on itself, and then basically all I'm doing is making sure I'm distorting the shit out of it by getting the oscillators way up. I have noise right now is actually feedback, that's going high up. We're gonna make sure the low pass or the high pass is cut so it has all the low end. we got a pretty cool, deep bass. I'd maybe use that as a deep layer, but I wanted to do is have this very like pulsing, but we wanted to feel a little more human as opposed to it being like all done by an LFO. So a bunch of the tracks are just us manually going. It's essentially just driving the envelope amount and making the thing kind of fart out on itself. Was the bass, and then suddenly, if you come with me here, this.